Hello and welcome! In this video we're gonna talk about the short story The Third and Final Continent written by Jhumpa Lahiri. For our presentation outline, we'd like to present you some information about the author, a thorough synopsis, the characters, and to end it, the structure. Have fun and enjoy!
About the author. Jhumpa Lahiri Bavolios, originally named Nilanjana Sudenshi Lahiri, was born on July 11, 1967 in London. In her early childhood, she immigrated to the US with her family, who has Bengali roots. While studying literature, she developed a greater interest for writing. Because of her background story, she mainly wrote stories about Indian people leaving their country of origin, similar to her ancestors, as well as many other often discussed topics. After publishing her first collection of short stories, called Interpreter of Melodies, she won the Pulitzer Award, also including The First and Final Continent.
The short story, The Third and Final Continent, starts with the 31-year-old narrator traveling solo to London from India in 1964, 6 years after his mother's death and 15 years after his father's death, leaving him and his brother alone. Having arrived in London, he shares an apartment with other Bengalis. However, then he gets a job offer in the US at the prestigious Massachusetts Institute of Technology as a librarian. At the same time, his brother arranged a marriage back in Calcutta, India, with a woman called Mala, despite them not knowing each other. After the wedding, he flies to Boston to attend his new job. On his flight, the moon landing was announced, resulting in everyone cheering. God bless America. For more information about the moon landing, click on the first link down below. Now back to our story. In Boston, he lived at the YMCA at first, but then he starts looking for a more private place to live. Until his wife's arrival, he then moves in with a woman called Miss Croft. She's a 103-year-old lady living alone, renting a room for students from certain universities. While he lives with Miss Croft, the two of them develop a routine where he has to sit next to the lady on a bench talking about the moon landing. Even though the narrator always has to say splendid over and over again, they soon become some kind of friends.
This friendship and daily routine between the two of them was further strengthened when Mrs. Croft's daughter Helen paid the two of them a visit. During this visit, her daughter reveals that Mrs. Croft had called the narrator a true gentleman, and him being her first tenant to ever be called that. However, after that, Mala's papers are ready, and she finally becomes a green card to travel to the US, leaving the narrator to move out. Although the two of them then start to build their own new life in America, they still feel more like strangers than husband and wife. Additionally, the narrator feels slightly uncomfortable with Mala because she had at first trouble to adapt to the American culture. Yet this uncomfortable atmosphere between them both changes after they visit Mrs. Croft again. There, Mala immediately bonds with Mrs. Croft and gets even called a perfect lady, therefore being the perfect match for the narrator. Shortly after this visit, Mrs. Croft dies, but is being kept in remembrance by the narrator due to the big impression she not only made on him, but also his wife. In the end, the narrator reveals that by now he has lived in the US for 30 years, and that he even had a son with Mala and had discovered his love for fatherhood.
You can see the protagonists of the short story. At the left, the narrator, an Indian man. Mala, in the middle, his wife, also from India, and Mrs. Croft, the 103-year-old lady. Because this video focuses on the synopsis and the structure of the short story, we won't dive into a whole characterization right now. For that, you might follow the link in the information box down below.
When talking about structures, there are 5 main parts in almost every short story. To build a proper foundation on which a short story can be told, the reader needs to know some background information about the protagonist and other important characters. For our short story, the narrator's past and his recent whereabouts are all added up to portray him as the Bengali man who tries to build a new life whilst also following his roots and staying somewhat traditional. The next part, called rising action, then is provided to bring the recipient's attention to the novel and making it interesting through focusing on the main aspects of the short story. In our example, this is resembled by an arranged marriage, a very old lady, and becoming independent. The rising action ends with the climax, which is known to be the best part of the story, and our narrator feels some kind of love for his wife for the first time and gets reassured by his landlord, the elderly lady. Coming after that is the falling action, in which the recipient is supposed to get settled in the new situation the narrator now lives in, loving his wife and overcoming the death of one of his closest friends, Mrs. Croft. The resolution then, as the name says, results in the narrator being depicted 30 years later and therefore tells the recipient a happy ending.
What you need to know, a short conclusion. To conclude the video, we will give you a final and short overview. First, the short story The Third and Final Continent was written by Jhumpa Lahiri and published in a book concluding several short stories of immigrants. Second, Jhumpa Lahiri wanted to write those stories because she herself is a woman living in the US having Indian roots. A very short synopsis of our synopsis. The Third and Final Continent is a story about a young Indian man immigrating. After a short stay in England, he marries a woman called Mala in India. As this was an arranged marriage, they did not know each other. Because he got a job offered in the US, he moves to Boston, living with an old lady, Mrs. Croft, until his wife Mala arrives. Only because of a visit at Miss Croft, Mala and the narrator are getting closer, finally becoming a real family. Even though Miss Croft dies in the end, they live a happy life in the US for 30 years now. The structure of the short story is a very usual and normal structure. It has an exposition, a rising action, the climax, the falling action, and a resolution. Now, we want to know, what did you learn? Therefore, we have a short quiz for you. Please, do not cheat. You can pause the video. In this video, you did not only learn about the structure and the synopsis of the short story, you also got to know the author. Therefore, the first question is, what is the title of Jhumpa Lahiri's first published book, and which award did she win with it? The second question will dive into the synopsis. What did the people on the plane cheer when the moon landing was announced in 1969? The third and final question for this quiz is a question with a personal answer. Why do you think Jhumpa Lahiri wanted to write a book about stories of people immigrating? Because there is no right or wrong, you may want to discuss that in the comments. The answers to the other questions you may find in the information box down below.
We hope you enjoyed this video and that we were able to answer all your questions about the general content and structure of the short story The Third and Final Continent. If you liked it, maybe give it a thumbs up, and for more videos click the links in our description.